Hey, so everyone I know is worried about their job being automated by AI systems. My white collar friends are worried about, you know, text based agents on their computer automating their work, and my blue collar friends are worried about robotics ultimately automating the manual labor that they do. And I'm, I've also been worried about this myself, and I think we're all justified in being concerned about this because the future of the world is uncertain and it's not clear what's going to happen. But lately, I I think that there might be two or three types of job that could be very very well defended from AI automation. In fact, it might even be the case that AI automation cr- creates an explosion of demand for these types of work to such an extreme degree that people who are in these lines of work could do very 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 well. And so I'd like to basically present this hypothesis here and hear what you have to say, and ultimately explore this with you if you're interested. There's these three areas I think are taste making, trust making, and kind of gatekeeping rare data or curating rare data. Uh, what do I mean by this? By taste making, I mean um, people who define the definition of success when AI is doing a task. So think people do this sometimes via prompting, where they'll do a bunch of prompting to ultimately define what they want an AI system to do. They do this via being hired as a mechanical Turker, where companies will hand them sort of scenarios that an AI is in, and they will describe what an AI should do in that scenario, kind of exercising a sense of taste. Um, and finally, with benchmark creation, where people will create these benchmarks like humanity's last exam and other things to say based on their sense of what is good in the world. What is an AI doing a good job or a bad job? And that's tastemaking, right? So I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of demand for tastemaking, and I'll come back to that in a second. The second is trust making. So when you can't do the tastemaking or aren't going to do the tastemaking yourself, uh, how do you develop trust with another party, with another person or company or something like that, so that you can subscribe to their tastemaking, if that makes sense. Um, so that's kind of trust making. So not necessarily the them doing the tastemaking, but the act of building trust, so that they that you can choose who is going to do the tastemaking for you. And the third is rare data, which is I think there are going to be some data sources in the world that have reasons, special reasons why they're going to remain rare, and the gatekeepers to those sources of information, I think are going to do quite well in the world. So let me attempt to unpack this a little bit, and how do you craft a career to ultimately be in one of these three areas. But first, let me quell some doubts. So the most obvious doubt to either taste making, trust making, or rare data is basically to say that we won't need very many people to do it. So you might say, Andrew, we don't need that many tastemakers in the world. Pick any object. There's a small number of people who in the world who design that now, and we all seem to use that object just fine. How many people are really working on the next version of the Apple laptop? Johnny Ive, for example, I assume he and a small number of people did most of the taste making for this, iPod or AirPod case, and this was mass manufactured, and millions and maybe billions, I don't know, of people are using this. Do we really need that much taste making if every object in the world can really have like one or two taste makers, and then it satisfies it for everyone else? Um, Fair case. For trust making, you could say, well, Andrew, we have a handful number of centralized brands that we trust to source things for us. So a handful of news agencies who do that for us. Like they'll develop trusted relationships with journalists, who develop trusted relations with independent news sources. Do we really, is everyone in the world really going to be in the trust making business? Interesting question. Let's unpack that. I think the best way to unpack that question is to envision the most extreme version of AI automation possible, meaning the most dramatic uh, uh, form of AI automation in an economic system. And I think the most dramatic fashion is if every single person in the world has a fleet of personal AI robots, possibly humanoid robots, right? each of which is basically the whole economy in a box, meaning like literally any type of product or service that you might want from the world that you would have previously gotten through the global economy is now independently accomplishable, producible by a robot that you entirely own and operate for free. So I mean this in the most extreme case example. So when you want, you know, this, right? That your personal fleet of robots could go out in the world and dig into the ground and find the raw natural resources needed for this, extract it, refine it, manufacture it, design this, and ultimately assemble everything together and cause it to be this thing that you have in your hand that was supplied from no one except for, you know, the Earth's raw resources and this fleet of, you know, say open source AI robots that you have at your disposal. That's the most extreme version of AI automation. And I think the reason that it's the most extreme version is that, you know, in a world like that, when would a person buy something from another person, right? Like you have basically no economic dependence on any other person in the world. Everyone is a complete economic island. But in a world like that, one really big thing has changed. And that is, instead of going to a store and purchasing from a multiple choice set of options, you now have a fill in the blank, ask for literally anything. Instead of, you know, me going on Amazon and maybe there's like 1,000 water bottles that I can choose from, maybe there's 10,000. Great. Now there's billions of possible ways that I could ask for a water bottle. And most of them might be crap. But there are going to be some that are better for me relative to other people, right? Based on any number of reasons that I might have for preferring one thing over another. And the question is not, you know, is it possible for me to purchase that or not? The question is, do I know what's going to lead to the best possible water bottle for me or the best possible anything? And the truth is, knowing what you want requires a tremendous amount of education about yourself and about the full permutations of what could exist in the world, right? It's not about the AI knowing. It's about you being able to specify what it is you're looking for, because that's how you reveal information to an AI that allows it to ultimately maximize for whatever you consider to be success. And basically the problem is just decision fatigue. That when every little decision you make in your life no longer has 2 options or 10 options or 10,000 options, but an infinite number of options, then the bottleneck is taste. The barrier between you and a better life is just the ability to ask, right? And that, I think, is going to be just crazy overwhelming for every single person in the world. Not just because of the actual active decision fatigue itself, but also because of the education that is required to even know about the supply chain of everything that might go to this water bottle. And not just like the physics of it, but like the politics of the supply chain. Like who am I putting in power when I mine from different parts of the world, or whatever the case might be, right? Yeah. You know, it's literally every object around you now multiplied times an infinite amount of potential complexity. And I think that is going to be overwhelming for every individual person in the world. It means that you have the full flexibility to choose any redesign any belief system, redesign any drug or genetic anything, to tell any story, to consume any story, film or movie or whatever. Like the demand for taste, I think, is going to be absolutely overwhelming in the extreme. So much more than any person could ever do for themselves. So even if they have this facility, this thing that's in their life that can theoretically produce any object or product or service for them, that's not enough, right? Because they have to have a definition of good that is just as robust in order for them to live the best possible life. Now, they might just settle and say, like, oh, I don't really care. I'll just have a good enough version of everything, if that makes sense. But I think people will continue to be curious. I think people will continue to want progress. People will continue to want to innovate. And the bottleneck towards that innovation just shifts from the synthesis of ideas and the thinking and all this kind of stuff to the taste making and to the robust enough definition of good that can't be hacked by the AI system to actually lead to something that's bad. That if it's 8 billion people who all have that level of expressiveness of everything in their life, we don't have enough people to do all that for themselves, if that makes sense. Meaning each person requires way more than I think one person level of taste making to design the world around them and to maximize for the design of that world. So what do we do? Well, each individual person will have to delegate that. That's the trust making, right? So they have to figure out who in the world they can trust to do some of that taste making for themselves, because they don't have the time to fully dig into all the taste making that might be required. And that's fascinating, because on the one hand, that will save you time by finding some people that you can trust. On the other hand, you have to actually do the work of developing trusting relationships with other people, which means trying out things that they do and seeing like, do I like that? Do I not like that? Does it seem like it's good, or does it seem like it's bad? If that makes sense. And there's an interesting observation from a researcher named Robin Dunbar, who says that humans have a cognitive limit on the number of people they can develop a trusting relationship with, and that it's around 150 people, and I assume that kind of extends a little bit to like brands, for example, that they can trust. This is basically a constraint on the number of sources of taste-making information that you can take on in the world. And so the selection of those 150 people is exceptionally important, because these are the 150 people that are going to build your world. Like in essence, these are the 150 people that are kind of going to design your house, that are going to, supply you with food and all this other kind of stuff, right? Not because they're going to build it for themselves, but they're going to become stewards of the definition of success, of that food that ultimately AI will then, actually execute on, if that makes sense. And so, of course, 150 people is also probably not enough to fully do that for you. Way more than 150 people are responsible for doing that for you right now. And so it'll have to be the 150 people that they know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you think about the world as like 6 degrees of freedom, or 6 degrees of separation between every other person, so like your friends of friends of friends of friends of friends of friends includes every person in the world, then there's kind of this like taste making that's more than any person could do for themselves. And there's trust making, which is really about you saying, hey, the people around me are kind of similar enough to me, right? I'm cultivating relationships that I trust, that I can delegate some, and then they're going to delegate some, and they're going to delegate some. But even as you scale that up and say, oh, I'm going to choose the 100 people I trust and that they trust and all that kind of stuff, and that's going to mean that I have the most amazing taste resources available to myself that AI can then curate. Don't forget, to participate in that means that other people are delegating taste making to you, if that makes sense. And so that when you kind of repeat this around the world, what you get is this kind of like trust exchange system where each person is needing to do taste making work to try things out, see whether they like them, and then pass that on to the parties that are around them to develop relationships and a sense of reliability with other people in the world, that you are a good taste maker along all the dimensions that make life interesting. Now, you might still have a doubt when I describe a system, and that doubt might go something like this. Andrew, all of those decisions are already being made today, and they're being made by a relatively small percentage of the world, and the rest of us are mostly like executing on that vision. Like most of us are executors. We're think like in a blue collar world, a construction worker is not the architect. There's like one architect, and then there's the people instantiating the manifestation of that architect and building like 15,000 copies of the same home, for example. Or in a white collar sense, there's the people who build accounting systems and set the accounting rules, and there are accountants that execute those rules. So it seems like when push comes to shove and it all comes together, only a very small percentage of the world actually needs to be tastemakers, and everyone else are followers. And this is where things get really interesting. And the question of AI employment actually kind of comes down to centralization or decentralization of power. Because you see, I don't believe, and one core belief, do you believe that most people in the world want the same products and services? Meaning, are if some products and services in the world are really similar to each other, is that because everyone in the world actually wants the same thing, or is something else at play? Because there's considerable evidence to suggest that people are weird. People are unique. People have odd desires, and that we naturally want to kind of like diversify and like explore all sorts of different ways to live and different kinds of people to be, but that there's something right now that is suppressing that. And I would argue that the thing that's suppressing that is mass manufacturing, statistics, and mass media. I'm not going to go into all of that right now because these are really deep topics, but I will recommend some recommended reading. On statistics, I recommend checking out the book Seeing Like a State. In this book, it lays out how the advent of statistics caused governments to impose structure on the world and push people to be similar to each other, so that the government could keep track of them. This is why we have grid-based address systems, and why you have a home address as opposed to being a nomadic person, right? There's like a lot of effort that went into that. The second is, I guess, mass media. For that, I recommend the book Propaganda by Edward Bernays, where he details how we manufacture kind of everyone in the world kind of consuming from the same set of ideas and same information at roughly the same time that kind of brings our minds into much closer alignment. Like why we have 2 political parties instead of 15 million political parties, if that makes sense, in the United States. And the third one is mass manufacturing, which is this idea that the economy is optimized to sell many large copies of the same thing. And so that's imposing structure on everyone. And so basically, if you believe that that is the ideal way for the world to live, then the current ratio of tastemakers to executors is a steady state, and power is very centralized and will continue to remain centralized amongst a very small set of tastemakers who sort of impose that structure on the world. But I don't think that's the case. I think that the reason why the world is shaped that way right now is because we don't have AI. It's because of information overload. It's because of privacy and veracity issues. It's because mass manufacturing requires everything to be copies of the same thing. And that if left to our own devices, we would return to the diversity of culture that we had before the last 500 years, if that makes sense. And that that is going to create such an incredible increase in demand for tastemaking and trust making, that the world is going to feel a great demand for employment across everyone. So again, this is a hypothesis. I didn't navigate every possible tangent on this, but I hope you find it to be a really interesting concept. And I think that there's the potential for basically tastemakers in every aspect and every decision in the world, and then trust making amongst every community to help facilitate that tastemaking being communicated. Finally, I'll finish with rare data. And that basically is there are some areas in the world where you produce data yourself, and the more unique you become, when you have a unique in any way, then becomes interesting and rare data for other people who would then want to benefit from that pattern and the taste making that can then exist on that pattern, if that makes sense. So think if you have a rare disease on the negative side of things. If you have a rare disease, you then become very valuable to the other people who happen to have that disease for statistical information that can help an AI system be accurate in that regard. So I think there's a certain degree to which, if what I said before is true and all of us have the opportunity to be more unique, that will create a situation where all of us end up creating much more rare and unique data along the way, which then makes each of us more valuable to kind of the global economic system of trading intelligence and taste. You might ask lots of questions about how you maintain the rarity of that data. What happens when you share it with someone else, and then or put it online and everyone has it? How do you make money from it? Blah 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 blah. That's a cryptography question. I'm down to talk about that if anyone wants to. But overall, this is a theory around which types of jobs would be safe from AI. I think it permeates every subset of the economy, and can operate the scale that's necessary for global employment. Yeah, love to hear what you think.